Welcome back to Wingnuts, the home of micro maintenance, and on this episode we are back in the workshop, our world headquarters, working on our custom Skyranger Nynja LS. This is the 600 variant, and in this episode we are looking at some of the more scarier parts about wing building. Okay, time for the next bit, and first thing we're looking back is back onto the manual. And for those of you that are watching this that are building your own, you probably read a bit right at the start of the wing assembly where it says do not tighten up the eye bolts for the aileron. So that's what we're going to be looking at on this next bit. Why does it say that, and why do I not want to miss out that little bit of a section? It is going to be raw, so we might not have any problems. If we do, then great, then you get to see, but if not, I'll try and explain on there. But the first thing that we want to be doing is consulting the manual. Now the manual is God, and always read the manual, read the bit that you're going to do, read it again, take a look at the bits that you want to do, and then read the manual again. I really can't stress enough on how useful this manual is, and it's very easy to glance over some of the important parts that you may have tightened a bolt up unnecessarily. Remember, if you do end up undoing a lock nut, just to swap it out. This wing, when it's covered up, is quite difficult to get to once the skin's on, so you really don't want to be scrimping on a penny's worth of nuts. So like I say, make sure you've got a few bags of spare nuts and washers. You're definitely going to need them. Okay, so we are now up to the aileron and horn assembly, and it's popped in here for a reason, one of which is because we're going to line up the aileron so that we can make sure it's running right. With any kit-built aircraft, they fly as well as they're built. Again, I don't profess to being a Skyranger expert. That's what Flylight are there for. They very much are God when it comes to all things. But I have got a few thousand hours on Skyrangers on different types. And again, I've flown some very good ones, and I've flown some not so good ones, or not I say, they haven't handled as well. And they fly as well as they're built. And this is one of the areas where you can really sort of affect on how well that aircraft flies. We'll cover that in a moment, but for the time being we're going to have a quick read through the manual, bring ourselves up to speed. A few things that we need to look for are the component parts that we're going to need, so cables, your aileron, make sure you get the right one, and the aileron horn assembly. I'll go through those with you in a moment, but until then, let's get into that manual, read what we need to do next. So the first thing I'm going to do is run in some cables at this stage, and I'm going to mock up the aileron eye bolts. So in your pack of cables you would have a multitude. We are looking for these, so these are cable number, cable number 5. And there's two of these. These are the ones with the turnbuckles on one end and the D-links on the other end. And these aren't particularly handy, but you need one for each side, so we're going to need one of those. The other thing we're going to need, or the other cable we're going to need, is this one. This has got a turnbuckle kind of in the middle, and this is cable number 6A and cable number 6B. We're going to need, depending on which hand you're doing, the right side of this turnbuckle. Now this turnbuckle ultimately is going to end up in the cockpit, so if you can visualize it, it's going to be the cable that's going to be higher up, where the lower cables will come through the front strut down to the pivot stick. These are the ones that are going to connect each aileron, and this turnbuckle according to the manual, I've seen them in other places before, this should be on the P1 side. So depending on which wing you need, you will either need the longer or shorter cable. I can't remember until I've worked out which one of those is. So I'm going to identify which half I've got and which cable I've got for each half. So like I say, I'm going to spend a few minutes just sorting that out. Okay, so and identified which cables we need. So we've got some upper aileron cables. These are the ones with the turnbuckle on the end. We've got two of the same, and then the lower aileron. This is a port side wing, so this cable should be number 6A. We're looking for the upper aileron cable at this time, and what we need to do with this is thread this one through the upper pulley, and then it goes through the U-bolt that's over here. The other one goes through the lower pulley and then goes over the top of this SKR37. If that's the right tube. I'm sure it will be flashing on the screen if I've got it wrong. So we're going to do that now. Two ways of running it through the pulley. If you've left this bolt loose, you can remove that. The new bracket on that does make it a little bit difficult at this time, depending on how it's mocked up, or you can remove the bolts, remove the pulley and pop it in there. If that is what you're doing, just be careful that inside of here there is a washer, so make sure that the washers go back either side of the pulley. Again, otherwise you're going to find yourself with a few spare parts and not sure where they're from. So I'm going to crack on and do that. See you in a minute. Okay, so what we should have now is the upper pulley and the lower pulley. So this is the top surface of the wing. So we've got the upper pulley, the lower pulley is the upper aileron cable, and that's the one with the turnbuckle, and then the lower aileron cable is through the lower pulley. But the crossover in the wing, you see the upper aileron cable goes through the U-bolt and the lower aileron cable goes over the top of this tube. Now, following this lower upper aileron cable, you'll see that there's also this protective sleeve. At some point that will be either fixed or zip tied or whatever in this position, so that the cable can run across that tube here freely. So anyway, these are mocked up. Next thing we need to do is take a look at getting these eye bolts mocked up. Okay, so whenever I'm doing any form of mock-up and not looking at making any permanent fixings, the last thing we want to be doing is rattling through nylock nuts. I mean, don't get me wrong, they aren't the most expensive thing to buy, and I know previously I said make sure you've got them. That's for if you decide to undo a nylock. But when you're doing things like this on mock-up and you do want a little bit of tension, we tend to use wing nuts. Nicely apt, know a very good YouTube channel. The reason I use wing nuts is it's a great way of getting a temporary fix. But as opposed to using, say, just a normal nut, as opposed to a nylock nut, a wing nut is very obvious when you look down them. And so if you've done mock-up and you spot that you've got a wing nut, you know that it's time to replace it. You know, it's one that you've forgotten to take out. So certainly on a visual cue, it's very easy to spot a wing nut that's mocked up as opposed to a non-nylock nut that you've used for mock-up. So yeah, if I can give you any hints or tips that we use, I say using wing nuts for mock-up means that you can easily undo them. You haven't got to get your spanners out or anything like that. Yeah, wing nuts, very useful. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is look at mocking up the aileron to the wing. So like I've said, this is the port wing. So obviously the ailerons are handed, so we need to make sure that we get the right hand. But one of the issues that I come across quite regularly is that these eye bolts sometimes can be a right pain in fitting the required bolt there. And so with a 6mm reamer, what I'm going to do is just make sure there's no burrs or anything in there that's just preventing these bolts. So as an example, this one here doesn't go in there as easily as I would like it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run a reamer through all of these eyelets just to make sure that there are no burrs in manufacturing or in the anodizing phase, so that they fit in nice. So if you're unsure if you've got the right handle or not, the aileron obviously is wider going towards the root than it is towards the tip, but on the underside you'll see we have these holes in there so that you can get to the nuts for the eyelets. These holes obviously should be down. Now we are looking to line these up carefully, and this is what we are checking for. We want to make sure that all of these 3 eyelets line up correctly and there is no snags. Now that can be difficult depending on how well they've gone, but we're looking now alright. Hopefully these bolts should slide in okay now that we've just gotten rid of any of the burrs. So now what I'm feeling for is any restrictions, making sure that the aileron has got a good movement of travel. Like I say that I haven't pre-fitted this one, so this is actually me checking, making sure everything's running okay. These are obviously your ailerons. We don't want it to fight you. We want to make sure that everything's running true, that there are no snags, it doesn't get tighter at the extremities, because that you really will feel that through the control cable. I think I've been a lucky one here because everything seems to be okay. So if you did notice that one of these wasn't quite lining up correctly or was snagging, you are allowed to slightly ease that hole, and again using a very light filing action, just slightly make that that hole line up better with the aileron hinges there. But we're okay, so we're going to get the Loctite out, get these nuts back on. So the next thing we need to do is mock up the aileron and the aileron horns. So these are the parts that you're going to need for the aileron horns. We're looking specifically at these parts at this moment in time. So obviously this is doubled up, so we're only going to need half of these. Got a few little tweaks to do on the U brackets there, but the first thing we need to do is find a hole that's been pre-drilled in the aileron leading edge. We've got some measurements for it. We're also going to need a soldering iron just so we can burn through the skin. But again, always double check before you do any permanent fixings, or certainly burning holes in skins. What we're going to look at doing is getting this aileron horn fitted up, so we can work out where we need to fit the rear hole, and making sure that the cables are in line with the aileron horn. So we've done one part, let's start the work on the actual ailerons. Okay, so the next thing we're looking at is fitting the aileron horn. So just to get your bearings, this is the underside of the port wing. You can tell that because we've got the access holes. This end is the root, that end is the wingtip, and this bracket should go over the hole we've burnt over there. Just line that there. There we go. And the aileron horn goes on the wingtip side. Now, this ideally should be 90 degrees so that the horn, the three rivet holes, will be this side. Just going to square that up, and what we're doing is making sure that this is as best in line with the pulleys as possible. So small mark, that's where it should be, and what we're going to do is pop this back on to the wing and make sure that the pulleys and the cables are at 90 degrees to this. What we're then going to do whilst it's on the wing is just make a mark on where the rear bolt needs to go, so we can mock the aileron horn up. Okay, so now we've got our measurements and we're happy with the placement of the lower brace. We've got some holes to make, so the first thing we can go ahead and do is mark where we want this rear bolt to go. Now this does need to be quite a sizable hole because we need to slide in this anti-crush or this former sleeve, this washer. So just bear in mind that when that happens we need to make a hole big enough there. And the other thing that we need to do is create a slot on the underside and the top surface so that we can fit this aileron horn. So we have a measurement in the manual, and on the underside it's 60mm from the center of the leading edge tube. So if I can find there being center, it's very useful that we have the bolt there. So from there, down to 60mm. Using the bracket as a guide. And I won't lie, this is one of the scariest parts of the job. So now we've got the holes in one side, and we made the hole big enough to take the spacer at the underside. Make sure just slot in there. We can now turn it over and put the required holes on the other side. Now don't make a terrible mistake of popping this on that side, because the bracket, the aileron horn, remember, will be on this side. So a useful way of doing this is with the other aileron bracket, and so that can slot through there. Now when I was cutting the rear, burning the rear hole, I was able to just pop through on the other side, so that I got an accurate measurement on this side so that the holes line up. But we do now need to cut the hole in this side. So again, we're looking from the center of the leading edge tube, which should be where the front bolt is. And this is a measurement that's 50mm down. And don't forget, measure twice, cut once. Okay, so the next thing we're looking at fitting is this U-bracket. This U-bracket here, and this fits over the trailing edge of the aileron. But just be careful, I've just spotted that there's a little bit of a burr on there, which that could scratch, split the skin there. So always just double check that there's no sharp edges on there. So I'm just going to take that burr off. Sometimes the powder coat can be a little bit thick. So these reaming tools really do come into their own. You want to make sure now that your bolt is going to pass through it quite freely. Ready for mock-up. Another thing that's worth bearing in mind is you can see how they are quite square, but the leading edge tube is significantly wider, a bigger diameter than the trailing edge tube. And so if that was to just slide on there, and certainly when we clamp it up, it runs the risk of pulling into the skin. So what we're going to do is just open this up just a slight amount, just to open up that channel, just so when it fits on everything, it's nice and snug, and is not going to start digging into the skin over a period of time. This can be a very tricky job. So here's an important learning curve, even for people like us. All the way through this video, I've been stressing read the manual, and also stressing the importance of mock-up. Don't be making any permanent fixings. Now, fortunately, I haven't made any mistakes. The only, well, I may have done. The only issue that I've done is I've put these bolts in the wrong orientation. But yeah, this is the beauty of not making anything permanent. You know, I haven't tightened up those nuts or in any way, and I've been constantly referring back to the manual, and so easy something as simple as just getting these bolts the wrong way around, can be slightly frustrating, but the beauty being is it's not the hardest job to now rectify, so I'll just quickly pop the bolts the right way around. Okay, so here we go. We now have the top surface and the bottom surface all permanently fixed now, so Loctited and tightened up. Remember not to over tighten on the tubes. Don't forget your Loctite. What we can go ahead and do now is see if this aileron horn fits. Now it's quite obvious, 3 holes on one side, 2 on the other. This in orientation. And we might need to make these holes slightly bigger depending on how well this slots in or not. So wish me luck. So what I've had to do is just run through on the holes there just to get rid of some of the powder coating. I've just dropped some rivets in just to make sure it lines up. So next thing I'm going to do is just have another consult of the manual, just make sure that I've got everything in the correct orientation before I go ahead and rivet that aileron horn to its brackets. Okay, so now we've got the aileron horn, top and bottom, all riveted in place. What we're going to do is mock it up, make sure that the cables run freely. What I've done is I've put a zip tie down on the tensioner tube there, just to put a little bit of friction on the cable. So again, mock up. Just going to mock this up, make sure everything is running free, and then we should be not far off being finished. So again, all the way through we've said manual. It really genuinely is important, and particularly when you finish a job like this, read the manual again. And this time you've got visual, you've got drawings, you've got diagrams that you can really then inspect when it's in, either in full mock-up, or particularly when you think I'm done, is a great way of just double checking. Anyway, I believe that I've built this wing correctly. The next phase is to remove the ailerons and get everything ready for us to put it into the skin, because that's the next physical job. What I also need to do before I put it into the skin is get this wing inspected by my build inspector. So I'm going to disconnect the aileron now. I'm going to tie up the cables ready for putting the skin on, and then I'm going to get our inspector Alan to come and give it his thorough looking over, and that should be us done.
And that's it for another episode of Wing Nuts, the home of micro maintenance. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Quite a tricky build, building some Nynja Skyranger wings. More to come though on the wing side and certainly on our custom build. So don't forget to click that subscribe button if you want to see more of our content. But until next time guys, thanks ever so much.